Luke sat on the edge of the barn loft, watching the first rays of dawn stretch across the endless fields. The ranch had belonged to his grandfather, and now it was all his: fenced acres, rolling hills, and soil that smelled of history and sweat. He rubbed his hands together, calloused and rough, and sighed. The work never ended. There were fences to mend, water troughs to clean, and cattle to check. Every day began before sunrise and ended long after the sun had dipped behind the western hills. Yet despite all the toil, the ranch felt empty, echoing with memories of his grandfather's booming laugh and his mother's gentle voice, both gone long before Luke had learned to truly appreciate them. Luke swung his legs over the side of the loft and climbed down, boots hitting the wooden floor with a hollow thud. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, familiar and comforting, but it was a smell that reminded him how alone he was. He trudged toward the stables, checking on the horses one by one, speaking softly to them as if they could understand his thoughts. "Morning, Daisy, easy now, boy," the animals responded with soft nuzzles and whinnies, but their company was no replacement for human presence. After feeding the livestock, Luke walked through the fields, hand-brushing over tall stalks of wheat. The soil was rich, dark, and fertile, yet it brought him no satisfaction. He had spent years nurturing it, following his grandfather's careful instructions, but the harvest felt hollow when shared only with the wind and sky. Sometimes, when the sun beat down mercilessly or a fence collapsed in the middle of a storm, he wondered if he had inherited more than just land. Had he inherited loneliness itself? His cabin, modest and sturdy, held the remnants of his family: photographs, old furniture, and letters that smelled faintly of time. Luke would sit by the fireplace at night, reading by the flickering light, and feel the weight of silence pressing against the walls. Even the creaking of the floorboards seemed to whisper that he was the only one left to carry on the family legacy. But what was legacy, he asked himself, if it was only soil and stone? Was this the life his grandfather had imagined for him? A life of work, duty, and quiet nights alone. Luke had grown used to the rhythm of the land, but the rhythm did not soothe his heart. The ranch demanded persistence, strength, and patience, and he had all three in spades, but it demanded more than just hard work. It demanded connection, the kind of bond he hadn't realized he'd lost until now. He paused by the creek that ran along the northern edge of the property, watching the water glint in the rising sun. The reflection of the sky, the trees, and the distant hills looked beautiful, but beauty alone could not fill the emptiness. He turned back toward the barn, resolving to face another long day. The fields needed tending, the fences needed fixing, and the harvest would not wait. Luke had learned to respect the land, but he hadn't yet learned to open himself to the world beyond it. Somewhere, he thought, there had to be more than this: the endless toil, the quiet nights, and the lingering ache of solitude. And perhaps, someday, that something more would find him, as surely as the sun rose over the golden fields each morning. It was mid-morning when the sound of a carriage approaching broke the familiar rhythm of Luke's solitude. Dust rose from the dirt road, and Luke paused, shading his eyes against the sun. Visitors were rare, practically non-existent, and he wasn't sure he wanted anyone interrupting his routine. But as the carriage stopped near the barn, he caught sight of her. A woman stepped down with confident grace, her dress simple yet neat, and her eyes curious, alive with warmth. She carried a satchel over her shoulder and wore a determined expression that seemed to say she belonged wherever she chose to go. "Morning," she called, her voice carrying easily across the fields. "I'm Emily. I heard about this ranch, and I thought I might offer some help." Luke frowned, unsure whether to be offended or amused. Help. On his land. The idea was foreign. He had spent years managing the ranch alone, relying on no one but himself. And yet, there was something in her gaze that made him pause. She didn't look like a meddler or a critic. She looked like someone who genuinely wanted to understand. Luke approached, hat in hand, unsure of what to say. "We don't usually get visitors," he admitted. "And I don't usually need help." His voice was gruff, rough around the edges, like the bark of the old oak near the creek. Emily smiled, undeterred. "I don't mean to intrude. I enjoy learning about places like this. And I thought maybe I could lend a hand with the work, planting, tending, or anything you need. Sometimes it's easier with two than one." There was no pity in her tone, only curiosity and kindness. Luke studied her for a long moment, measuring her sincerity. There was something different about her, someone who wouldn't judge him, someone who might actually see beyond the ranch, beyond the dirt and fences. The first days were awkward. Luke found it strange to have someone beside him while he worked, someone whose hands weren't used to the rhythm of cattle or the weight of hay bales. But Emily was patient. She asked questions, laughed at minor mistakes, and carried water and tools without complaint. She didn't rush, didn't interfere, she simply existed alongside him, a presence that felt more like companionship than assistance. Slowly, Luke realized he was looking forward to her visits, even timing his work so they could be together in the fields. Emily's laughter began to echo through the barns and open pastures, light and easy, brushing against the walls and lifting the heaviness Luke had carried for so long. She spoke of her hometown, of children she taught, and of small joys that didn't require land or cattle. For the first time in years, Luke noticed things he had overlooked, the way sunlight spilled across the wheat, the gentle sway of the creek, the soft murmur of the wind through the trees. With Emily there, the ranch felt alive, vibrant, and somehow less lonely. One evening, as they rested under the old oak tree after a long day, Luke finally spoke words he hadn't realized he'd been holding back. "I never thought anyone could make this place feel more than work." Emily smiled knowingly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Legacy isn't just the land, Luke," she said softly. "It's the moments we share, the care we give, the love we leave behind." Luke looked at her, understanding for the first time that perhaps the most important work wasn't in the soil or fences, it was in opening his heart. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to hum with a new kind of life. Luke woke each morning with a sense of purpose that wasn't solely tied to chores or harvests. Emily's presence had become as essential to him as the sunrise or the sound of the creek running through the fields. Together, they worked the land, shared meals, and laughed at small mishaps that once would have frustrated Luke alone. The barn, once echoing with emptiness, now resonated with conversation, music, and the soft shuffle of two people moving in rhythm with each other's routines. Emily had a gentle way of noticing the small things Luke overlooked. She'd planted wildflowers along the creek, their bright colors contrasting with the endless fields of wheat and corn. She insisted on reading aloud to him during breaks, and he found himself drawn into the stories, imagining new possibilities for both the ranch and himself. Luke had spent years focused only on survival, yet Emily reminded him that life wasn't just about endurance, it was about moments, connections, and beauty, both big and small. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, Emily paused to watch him. "You work so hard," she said softly. "But do you ever stop to enjoy it? To feel proud of what you've built?" Luke didn't answer immediately. He knew the land required constant effort, but her question struck a chord he hadn't realized was aching. For years, he had measured success in crops, fences, and cattle, not in smiles, laughter, or shared sunsets. Her words were a mirror, reflecting a side of life he had long ignored. Over time, Luke began to see his grandfather's legacy in a new light. The old man had not only tended the land but had nurtured community, friendship, and love. Luke understood now that the ranch's true wealth wasn't just soil or livestock, it was the bonds that formed on it, the memories sown alongside the crops, and the hearts touched along the way. Emily was teaching him that legacy wasn't just about preservation, it was about growth, of both land and spirit. One evening, after a long day of harvesting corn, they sat together under the golden glow of the setting sun. Luke felt a rare sense of peace, his body weary but his heart full. "I never realized how lonely I had been," he confessed quietly. Emily smiled, her hand brushing against his. "That's why legacy is more than land, Luke. It's love, care, and sharing what matters most with someone else." The words lingered in the air, sinking into his bones. In the weeks that followed, Luke found himself planning the future differently. He no longer imagined the ranch as merely a duty or a solitary inheritance. Instead, he envisioned it as a home filled with laughter, warmth, and shared dreams. Each fence they mended together, every seed they planted side by side, became a symbol of their growing bond. And slowly, Luke realized that the richest harvest of all was not the wheat or corn. They were the moments he shared with Emily, moments that transformed his life, his ranch, and his understanding of what it truly meant to inherit something worth cherishing. Autumn arrived with a golden glow, painting the fields in hues of amber and ochre. Luke walked alongside Emily through the harvest-ready crops, the soft crunch of dry leaves beneath their boots echoing through the quiet ranch. The wind carried the scent of soil and hay, but it also carried laughter, warmth, and a sense of belonging that Luke had never thought he'd experience. For the first time, the ranch felt alive not just because of the land, but because of the life they had breathed into it together. They paused near the old oak tree, the same one where weeks ago Luke had admitted his loneliness. Emily leaned against the trunk, her eyes catching the sunlight, and for a moment, he just looked at her, letting the quiet stretch between them like a gentle promise. "You've changed this place," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And you've changed me too." Luke smiled, feeling something swell in his chest, a mix of gratitude, awe, and love he had never allowed himself to recognize before. The work of the ranch continued, of course, but it was no longer a solitary burden. Together, they repaired fences, tended the animals, and planned the next planting season. Yet beyond the daily chores, they began to dream, of a life shared, of a future filled with laughter and love, and of a legacy that extended beyond soil and harvests. Luke realized that his grandfather's lessons were more than just about diligence and hard work. They were about stewardship, not only of the land but of hearts. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of pink and orange, Luke led Emily to a small clearing overlooking the northern fields. "This place has taught me a lot," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I used to think legacy was only about land, about hard work. But you've shown me it's about more than that. It's about love, about sharing life with someone who makes everything richer." Emily's eyes shimmered, reflecting the last rays of the sun, and she reached for his hand. "I never imagined finding this here," she whispered. "But I'm grateful I did." Luke pulled her close, the wind rustling through the cornfields, carrying their laughter and the warmth of their embrace across the land. They stayed like that for a long while, simply feeling the presence of one another, letting the ranch's quiet beauty wrap around them like a blanket. As the harvest moon rose, casting silver light across the fields, Luke understood something fundamental: the ranch was more than an inheritance. It was a home because of Emily. The fences they built, the crops they planted, and the long days of labor were not just duties, they were acts of love, woven into the very fabric of the land. And in that love, Luke found the truest kind of wealth, a legacy that would live on in hearts, stories, and memories, long after the soil had been tilled and the fields had been harvested. Together, Luke and Emily walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, hearts full, and minds at peace. The ranch would always need work, but now, the work would be shared, and so would the life, love, and legacy that made it truly theirs.